Imagine standing in a trench at dawn, and the wind shifts, and suddenly a pale green, yellow cloud starts rolling toward you across no man's land, low to the ground, hugging every dip in the earth like it's hunting you specifically. You have no mask. Nobody around you has a mask. Nothing in your training, your equipment, or your entire understanding of war has prepared you for what's about to happen. That moment actually happened on April 22nd, 1915, near a Belgian town called Ypres, and it marks one of the exact points where warfare stopped being something humans recognized and became something almost nobody alive had ever seen before. This is the story of how 4 new weapons, gas, the machine gun, the tank, and the airplane, took a war that generals expected to fight, like Napoleon, and turned it into something closer to industrialized slaughter, and how the soldiers living through it had absolutely no idea what was coming next. To understand how shocking this was, you have to understand what everyone actually expected in the summer of 1914. European military leaders, almost without exception, expected a short war built around cavalry charges, dashing infantry advances, and decisive battles that would be over by Christmas. Generals studied Napoleon. They trained for movement, for glory, for officers on horseback leading men across open fields with sabers drawn. Almost nobody, on any side, seriously planned for a war that would last 4 years and kill roughly 20 million people. The technology already existed to make that plan catastrophically wrong. Nobody had adjusted the doctrine yet. The first weapon that broke the old model wasn't dramatic or high-tech at all. It was the machine gun, specifically weapons like the German MG08, capable of firing around 400 to 600 rounds per minute, operated by a small crew instead of dozens of riflemen. A single well-placed machine gun position could cut down an entire advancing infantry line in seconds, the way a fire hose cuts down a field of wheat. On the first day of the Battle of the Somme alone, July 1st, 1916, the British Army suffered approximately 57,000 casualties in a single day. Nearly 20,000 of them killed outright, largely because waves of infantry walked directly into machine gun fire the way earlier wars had trained them to advance. That single day remains the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army, before or since. The machine gun didn't just kill soldiers. It killed the entire strategic assumption that infantry could simply walk toward an enemy position and win through numbers and courage. Once machine guns made open field advances suicidal, both sides did something nobody had planned for. They stopped moving. Armies dug in, and within months, a continuous line of trenches stretched roughly 700 kilometers from the coast of Belgium all the way to the Swiss border. This wasn't the fast, decisive war anyone had trained for. It was a stalemate hardened into the ground itself, and it created exactly the kind of static, densely packed target that made the next new weapon almost inevitable. That weapon was chlorine gas, and Germany deployed it at scale for the first time at the Second Battle of Ypres on April 22, 1915. German forces released roughly 168 tons of chlorine gas from over 5,700 cylinders along a 6-kilometer stretch of front line, and the greenish-yellow cloud drifted directly into French and Algerian trenches where soldiers had zero protective equipment and zero training for what was happening. Chlorine gas attacks the respiratory system directly, causing the lungs to fill with fluid, effectively drowning victims from the inside while they remained fully conscious. Estimates suggest roughly 1,000 soldiers died within minutes to hours in that first documented large-scale attack, and thousands more were left with permanent lung damage. Allied forces initially had no countermeasure beyond soldiers urinating into cloth and holding it over their faces, since ammonia in urine offered crude, partial neutralization of chlorine gas, a genuinely desperate improvised response to a weapon nobody had prepared for. Within a year, both sides had escalated to phosgene gas, roughly 10 times more lethal than chlorine, and by 1917 to mustard gas, which caused horrific chemical burns to skin, eyes, and lungs, and could linger in soil and equipment for days after an attack. By the war's end, chemical weapons had caused an estimated 1.3 million casualties across all sides combined, though total deaths directly attributable to gas are estimated at closer to 90,000 to 100,000, since gas maimed and blinded far more often than it killed outright. Here's what's genuinely fascinating about the gas attacks. Specifically, the German High Command almost didn't authorize large-scale use at Ypres because army leadership itself was divided on whether chemical warfare was a legitimate tactic or crossed a line that would provoke uncontrollable retaliation. The 1899 and 1907 Hague Conventions had already explicitly banned the use of projectiles designed to spread asphyxiating gases, and Germany's own legal advisors flagged the attack as a violation before it happened. It was authorized anyway, specifically because German commanders believed, correctly as it turned out, that once one side crossed that line, no other side would be able to resist crossing it too. Within months, France, Britain, and eventually every major combatant power had built their own chemical weapons programs. Nobody wanted to use gas first. Once someone did, nobody could afford not to. While gas attacked the body directly, the next weapon attacked the entire logic of trench warfare itself. On September 15, 1916, during the Battle of Flers-Courcelette, part of the broader Somme offensive, Britain deployed the tank in combat for the very first time in human history. The Mark I tank, essentially a slow, heavily armored steel box mounted on caterpillar tracks, moved at a maximum speed of roughly 6 kilometers per hour, barely faster than a person walking, and was cramped, deafeningly loud inside, and prone to mechanical breakdown. Of the 49 tanks deployed that day, only 32 actually made it to the starting line, and many broke down or got stuck in the mud before reaching German positions at all. Judged purely by immediate battlefield success, that first tank attack was, honestly, a fairly modest result. But judged by psychological impact, it was something else entirely. German soldiers who had never seen anything like it described the tanks in letters home as monsters, as impossible machines that bullets simply bounced off of, crawling directly over barbed wire and trench lines that had stopped infantry advances for 2 straight years. One German account described entire defensive positions breaking and running purely from the shock of watching a machine that artillery and rifle fire couldn't seem to stop. By 1918, tank technology had improved dramatically, faster, more reliable, better armed, and at the Battle of Amiens on August 8, 1918, Allied forces deployed approximately 580 tanks in a single coordinated assault, achieving a breakthrough so complete and so sudden that German General Erich Ludendorff privately called it, in his own post-war memoir, the Black Day of the German Army, not because of the number of casualties specifically, but because of what it proved that the static trench stalemate everyone had adapted to for 4 brutal years could, in fact, be broken, decisively, by machines nobody had believed in a decade earlier. Above all of this, a genuinely new kind of warfare was unfolding, entirely in the sky. In 1914, aircraft entered the war as unarmed observation tools, essentially flying binoculars used to spot enemy troop movements, and, critically, direct artillery fire with far greater accuracy than ground observers ever could. Pilots on opposing sides would occasionally wave at each other or even exchange informal greetings, since neither side had yet figured out that these fragile wood and canvas machines could become weapons themselves. That changed within roughly a year. Pilots began carrying pistols, then rifles, then improvised bomb racks, and by 1915, the introduction of synchronization gear, technology allowing a machine gun to fire directly through a spinning propeller without destroying it, turned aircraft into genuine dogfighting weapons for the first time. German pilot Manfred von Richthofen, known to history as the Red Baron, became the most famous fighter pilot of the war, credited with 80 confirmed aerial victories before being killed in April 1918, and his fame reflected something new in warfare itself: individual combat. Fought one machine against another, high above a battlefield that had otherwise become an anonymous, industrialized meat grinder for everyone fighting inside it. By the war's end, aircraft had evolved from unarmed scouts into dedicated fighters, bombers, and reconnaissance platforms, and early strategic bombing raids on cities, though still primitive and limited compared to what would come only 2 decades later, gave civilian populations their first direct taste of a war that could, in theory, reach anyone, anywhere, regardless of where the actual front line was drawn. So here's the actual, uncomfortable pattern running underneath all 4 of these weapons. Gas, the machine gun, the tank, and the airplane didn't just make World War I deadlier. They exposed, brutally and repeatedly, the massive gap between how fast military technology could evolve and how slowly military doctrine, tactics, and human psychology could actually adapt to it. Generals kept ordering infantry charges against machine gun nests years after it was obvious those charges would fail, partly because the old playbook was the only playbook anyone had ever trained on. Soldiers who survived one horror, machine gun fire, spent the next years learning to survive gas, then tanks, then aerial bombardment, each new technology arriving faster than doctrine, faster than protective equipment, faster than anyone's ability to psychologically process what warfare had actually become. By 1918, the war that began with cavalry regiments and sabers ended with tanks, aircraft, and chemical weapons, a transformation so complete that soldiers who enlisted in 1914 and survived to 1918 had effectively lived through two entirely different wars wearing the same uniform. The next time you see footage of modern warfare, drones, precision missiles, cyber attacks, ask yourself the same question World War I forces you to ask. Technology in war has never waited for anyone's doctrine, ethics, or psychology to catch up to it first. It simply arrives, and everyone standing in the trench when it does has to figure out, in real time, with no training and no manual, exactly how to survive something the world has genuinely never seen before.